I built Southern Rim Farms when I started in high school. Started buying cattle and just slowly building as I had the time and money working. We built it into operation to where we buy feeder cattle out of the stockyards, bring them in, vaccinate, feed, and then we'll ship them out anywhere from 75 days being here to 120 days, just depending on the size of the cattle we buy at the time. We get them probably in about a 100-mile radius of sale barns. We buy a few out of the country, but not many. Probably 90–95% of the cattle we bring in is coming out of sale barns. I've got order buyers, 3 or 4 order buyers, and I will call them in the morning, midday, check with them depending on what the board's doing, and let them know what I will bid for cattle. And then late in the evening when the sales are over, they'll call me and give me numbers, head counts, and then I'll have to organize trucks to get them delivered in here. Genetics is big because the cattle, it'll affect how the cattle feed and perform here. Color's big these days. A lot of these feed yards, and especially going north with cattle, want them 75, 80, 85% black cattle. So that's another thing. Size it will depend on the market and what time frame I'm trying to market the cattle into. So different times of year we will feed different size cattle. And we typically buy a lot of 550 to 575 into 600-pound heifers coming in. That would probably be 70–75% of what we feed here. Springtime of the year, we will tend to trend towards grass cattle, buying 3 and 4 weight cattle. Our biggest time of the year will run from October through about January. That's your biggest portion of calves are weaned at that time, and the markets are usually suppressed a little bit in the yards, so you're able to buy bigger numbers for cheaper prices. So we will be heavy October through January, and then January will trend to run probably at about 75% capacity on to May, and then it'll fluctuate from year to year through the summer depending on weather and the cost of cattle. And we have a model that we use when we buy cattle that I have a break-even calculator. We can calculate cost of gains, medicines, death loss, all that in there, and give us a break-even. And we have a set dollar that we try to make per day feeding these cattle. So if they'll fit into that model, we'll buy them. If they don't, we tend to sit out. I use a program called Stalker One. It's a web-based program. I can access it at any time. My guys, they have an access of a section that they can. They put the feed in, they put what they've doctored in. I put in what we buy, what we sell, and I can pull it up at any time, and it'll give me a ballpark of what the cattle should weigh, head count, how many days on feed they've been in there. I can look and see what's been doctored. So it's a pretty good program, especially to have right at your hand when you're out looking at cattle, deciding when you need to sell, when you need to hold. We're very fortunate here to have learned risk management tools. We use some futures, we use some options, and we'll contract some cattle, forward contract them. I went to a class in Glasgow they offered for dairymen on hedging milk, and that kind of got me started understanding how the futures work, options work, and talking with people I sell cattle with and conversations with people, learn more, and that just kind of led into feeling my way through it as I've gone through life, and learning some valuable lessons on losing some money on cattle that I should have had hedged or contracted. So typically we stay probably 95% covered here, whether we're hedged or forward contracted. We do retain ownership at times. Sometimes, like for instance right now, the feedlots are muddy, they're full. Their bids aren't very good, typically the end of January, February, and sometimes we'll feed some cattle of our own just to try to capture that basis. But We keep in mind of the live cattle board because that's where those cattle will wind up being marketed, so it's got to make sense. We typically don't try not to touch the cattle for the first 7 days they're here. We just get them to the feed bunk, let them eat. At times we do have to pull some cattle, but we try to let them be for 7 days. My protocol has been built with the vet in Smiths Grove, consulting back and forth with him and some of the things he's seen, some of the things I've seen. We've posted some cattle to find out what's going on with the cattle. We grow majority of our feed. We buy some wet distillers, and then I buy a mineral pack. The mineral pack has all the minerals. It's got Bovatec in it. We don't typically graze any cattle. Most of the cattle is on feed once they're into the feed yard here. We feed silage, we feed wet distillers, straw, and then ground corn. Typically high moisture corn. We bag a bunch in the fall. As the cattle are received, we start them in outside pens, usually lot sizes of around 80 to 100. We'll leave them outside in those pens depending on size, but if they come in weighing 550 to 600, they'll stay out there for about 28 days to 35 days, depending on how the cattle are getting along and how we're doctoring. And then we'll put them into the confinement barns for the last 25, 30 days they're here. We found having troubles trying to start them in the confinement barns, so we get them outside, get them some room, and then when they go in the confinement barns, they'll have roughly 43 to 47 square foot per head. It's a dry pack barn. It's got a concrete pad on the front where they stand and eat. The middle part of it is bedded with sawdust, and it's just basically used as dry pack. We clean it out about once a year and use that back on our crop fields where we raise feed for the rest of the year. The confinement barns come with their downsides and their plus sides. The plus side is we're getting at least a half a pound a day more out of the barns than we are outside. The cattle stay drier, they don't fight the elements like you do outside. A downside is you've got to bed it, it's more labor. You've got to haul the bedding out, clean it out, get rid of the manure. But in our situation, the benefits outweigh the negatives. We'll start the marketing process the day they come in. I'll start analyzing and looking at markets. If we can forward contract the cattle to make our target mark that we want to make on cattle, we'll just forward contract them and not have to worry. Times you can do that, times you can't. The times you can't, we'll look at hedging them on the board, whether using futures, and if we find that mark in the futures that we want to make, we'll sell them on the futures and just wait for the basis to come to us, because basis will fluctuate on a heifer $4 or $5 depending on time of year and closer to time and how far out you're trying to sell them. And if it looks like the market may rally for us and think we have some upside potential, we'll use options and just put a floor under the cattle and wait until the time to sell them. And usually if we have them hedged, I try to have them sold 2 weeks prior to that hedge needing to be lifted. Coming into this kind of operation today, there's a lot of challenges. It takes a lot of money to cash flow an operation, buying cattle, the feed, medicine, and then the biggest expense is land. The land in our area has gone up to where it's almost impossible to go out as a young person and buy the ground, buy the cattle, and make the payment on the ground off of the cattle. I was very fortunate when I got started. Ground wasn't high, and then I bought a couple farms and then was able to use the equity out of the farms to continue to grow. It's a way of life. Some people don't understand the way of life because of the amount of hours you have to put into a place like this. So you really have to enjoy it, and you really need your family a part of it, because if they're not a part of it, you're probably not going to see a whole lot of your family, because we put a lot of hours in. Summertime, trying to get things ready for the fall, we'll have a lot of 80+ hour weeks, put in here. In the fall, you come in kind of grumpy because of the weather and things, so the family needs to be involved in some of these things to make things work.